53 people were seen by NHS gender identity clinics in England, but only 4,910 gender certificates have ever been issued, so the government's considering simplifying the process, allowing self-identification.
When I was 5 years old, I realised that I wasn't like other boys, and I started looking for girls' clothes. I went to university as a man, but at night I would be Sue.
Sue Pascoe has fully transitioned and legally changed her gender, and for her it was a long and arduous process. For years she was married with children.
When our first child came along, she didn't think that Sue should be in our lives and that it wasn't right for the children. And I agreed to that, and I went into an internal prison.
In 2014, she finally became Sue, travelling to India for surgery when faced with a 3-year waiting list in the UK.
Today I'm at peace, and now I'm legally female. So I have a female birth certificate. I would be buried as a female, and if, God forbid, I ever got into prison, I would go to a women's prison.
Feminists are against moves to make the process Sue went through to legally change her gender easier, concerned self-identification could be abused, compromising female-only spaces and eroding women's rights. In North London, a group of women are waiting to make a splash. Posing as men to invade the male-only pool.
Female swimming pond there, male swimming pond here. That's the way it has always been.
They believe the idea of self-identification, the ability to tick a box to be seen as a woman in the eyes of the law, is ludicrous.
OK, just so you know, you're breaking the bylaw.
You have the swimming ponds here, you have Swim England who do the swimming pools, you have the sleeper trains, you have the Youth Hostel Association, you have Girl Guides. All these places say, as soon as you say the magic words, I am a woman, that's it, you're a woman, and you can access women's spaces.
The stunt was organised by Hannah Clark.
We protest about bathrooms and we protest about changing rooms, but those aren't the big deals, are there? It's places where women are vulnerable that are a big problem. So prisons and hospital wards and refuges are a massive issue. It's been in the news, hasn't it? Ian Huntley could get a gender recognition certificate and get a new birth certificate, become to all intents and purposes a woman and be housed in the female prison estate. If anyone can be a woman, what is to protect a woman in a woman's space?
It actually feels quite painful to have a group of people who are campaigning against your participation in everyday life.
We went to Manchester to meet Jess Bradley.
I identify as a non-binary woman.
She says the objections to trans women accessing female spaces just don't add up.
Trans people disproportionately face domestic violence and sexual assault. We need access to services. We've had the Equality Act for the last 8 years, and that's actually the act that allows trans women to enter women's spaces. It's a long time for these abuses to take place, but they haven't. The evidence isn't there.
It wasn't easy finding Jess. Most trans people we approached were reluctant to go on camera, some scared of repercussions, others refusing to appear on a programme alongside the feminists.
Trans people are very, very scared of talking publicly about trans issues. Like, I know that simply by doing this piece of media that I will be hounded on social media. It's actually a really hostile time for trans people. One of the things about the Gender Recognition Act debate and consultation is that it's kind of given licence to anti-trans activists to kind of spark a public debate about trans identities and trans people in a way that has felt very violent.
And there's hostility on both sides. These are trans activists protesting outside a feminist meeting. They're shouting TERF. It stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. Across the country, clashes are erupting between the two groups.
So many problems in the past when we've announced venues ahead of time, where trans rights activists have phoned the venue over and over again asking them to no platform us because they consider us a hate group.
Hannah is at a meeting of women who feel they've been excluded from the discussion about changes to the Gender Recognition Act. One woman told us how she'd been attacked by a trans activist at another meeting who was later found guilty of assault.
I'm still angry about the assault, I'm angry about the trial. My anger could lift a bus. In fact, I understand that gender dysphoria is a very, very serious and upsetting thing, but they cannot actually be women. The most they can be is what we call trans women.
Feminist or pro-lesbian position. You know what, you're a bit
And there's more trouble at today's event, this time over lesbian rights.
You're gonna check me out, yeah? Fair enough. Like, do it.
We just want you to leave.
Lesbian is a sexual. I'm not talking about that. Lesbian means homosexual female. And I'm so sick of
This is a meeting, Kat. We need to be making.
Do you think that there is a lot of transphobia going around this evening?
I don't think so generally. I think most people in the room are forward-thinking people that are trying to get their heads around, you know, the nonsense in society.
And at this year's London Pride, protesters also disrupted the parade, claiming the trans movement is anti-lesbian.
I'm absolutely shocked at the level of vitriol, the level of silencing. Even asking for the discussion is thought of as transphobic.
Dr. Heather Brunskill-Evans wrote a book on trans children. She's on her way to speak at an event where again she's met by opposition.
Hey ho ho, transphobia has got to go! Hey, hey, ho ho, transphobia has got to go!
And trans men, what about
trans men are there!
These groups, they sit and perpetuate a hateful rhetoric.
No one has the right to tell you how you want to or do not want to identify. That is up to you.
I haven't started any kind of hormone therapy yet or a full transition, so what will happen to the Gender Recognition Act directly affects me.
We weren't allowed to film inside this meeting, but back at her home, Heather describes the aggression she's faced.
Well, are you blocking us? Don't you dare. Are you can somebody film this?
Here, a group of protesters are blocking her way.
We need to get into there.
I don't like being on a stairwell where I'm frightened that I'm going to be pushed down by a man with a mask who's telling me that he's a woman, and that if I don't accept that, I'm a Nazi. It's extremely frightening. It should be possible to have a discussion where there are a range of different people with a range of different truths who can enter into a dialogue about this.
But what does the public think? According to the British Social Attitudes Survey, people seem to be pretty liberal, with 84% claiming not to be prejudiced at all against transgender people. And when asked if most people who are transgender go through the process because of a superficial or temporary need, only 12% of women agreed and 18% of men. 72% of women said they were comfortable or very comfortable with a transgender woman using a female public toilet, with 65% of men saying they were comfortable or very comfortable.
This is a fight, this is a struggle for women's rights, and it's an urgent fight.
Staunch feminists like Dr. Nicola Williams argue the public hasn't been given enough information to fully understand what's at stake.
We have to find this courage to speak out. By me acknowledging that a trans woman has a male body could be considered hate. Trans women are by definition male. You know, they were born male. You know, I don't say that to be offensive. You know, it's fact. I've got no problem with people living in role as a woman, because gender dysphoria is real. There are times when biological sex does matter for safeguarding, for privacy and dignity, fairness in sports, for example, and that's when the sex of a person must be acknowledged. In a society, we always have checks and balances. So that people do not abuse the system.
The question of who decides who gets to be a woman seems destined to become more polarised. The centuries-long fight for women's rights engulfed by a whole new conflict.
What makes a woman?
I don't think there is such a thing as a real woman.
We must not confuse ideology with biology.
Being transgender is not an illness.
I want to live in a world where being trans, if it is a choice, then it's a valid choice.
I know I'm not bigoted. I know that people are going to call me that.
People are so angry and so against something that they just don't understand.
We must have debate about something which potentially affects huge numbers of people.
No credit with the courts. The decisions ruled flawed made by the government's flagship benefit scheme. You're risking Brexit if you don't agree a deal, the warning to MPs from those close to Theresa May. Standing up for women's rights, why a Saudi teenager turned refugee has been granted asylum in Canada. America's government shutdown nears a record as hundreds of thousands of workers go without pay. And demanding change, France's Gilets jaunes speak out on why they protest. Hello, good morning. 4 single mothers have taken on the Department of Work and Pensions and won after arguing that universal credit had left them hundreds of pounds worse off. As the judges ruled that the Secretary of State had wrongly interpreted the regulations, the current holder of that office, Amber Rudd, was trying to relaunch the controversial benefit scheme, promising to make it compassionate and fair. And after signalling to Sky News in an interview that the benefits freeze would end next year, she admitted she's yet to square those problems with the Treasury. Sky's political correspondent Tom Rayner reports.
Her first major speech as Work and Pension Secretary, and an acknowledgement that universal credit needs a fresh approach.
A standard offer cannot work for everyone. People's work patterns, the pressures they face, their families, everyone's circumstances are unique. I want to make sure universal credit has enough flexibility to adapt to personal circumstances, particularly the needs of the most vulnerable.
But even as she was talking, there was a reminder of the pressure that the new benefit system is coming under. Midway through the speech, news was filtering through from the High Court. Judges had ruled in favour of 4 single mothers who'd claimed the system's automated monthly payment assessments had wrongly left them hundreds of pounds worse off.
It's been devastating. Yeah, so one particular client, she ended up in a situation where she was being forced to choose between being able to pay her rent or to be able to pay her childcare costs. So, every time she was treated as receiving 2 wages in one assessment period, her UC award went down by about £400 to £500. That's the cost of her rent.
Unions are already demanding compensation be paid to any other claimants who face the same issues. Amber Rudd says she's considering her response to the ruling, but in the meantime hoping the changes she set out today will start to change perceptions of the system. Among the measures announced were new steps to make weekly and fortnightly payments more accessible, the launch of a new online system for private landlords to make it easier to get rents paid directly to them, and most significantly, an announcement that a planned extension to the 2-child benefit cap would be scrapped. But Labour says this does not go far enough.
This is a partial U-turn on the part of the government. Labour has long been calling for the government to scrap the 2-child limit in its entirety. We're very clear universal credit isn't working, it's pushing people into poverty.
Tuto, a disabled single mother who campaigns for better childcare provision, welcomed Amber Rudd's pledge to make it easier to access emergency funds for upfront childcare costs. But she says firmer commitments would be needed to give parents the real confidence to go back into work.
Ultimately, they want us to return to work. Ultimately, we want to return to work. So let's find a way of making childcare and work pay.
In the course of the last year, universal credit has been blamed for pushing people into rent arrears, food bank use and even homelessness. Amber Rudd's announcements are unlikely to end those criticisms, but they are intended as a signal of the start of a new approach, a sign perhaps that further, more substantial changes could be on the way.
Amber Rudd gave Sky News a hint of what one of those changes might be, indicating the 4-year benefit freeze will not be renewed when it ends next year.
So you think it will come to an end, the benefit freeze?
Well, it has 1 more year to run, and then it will come to the end.
But asked about what that might cost the Treasury, she confirmed things hadn't quite got that far.
I haven't had any further conversations with the Chancellor, so I'd better not say anything too definitive at this stage.
Amber Rudd's made clear she wants universal credit to change. But how and when that happens may not be entirely in her control. Tom Rayner, Sky News, Westminster.
Brexit could be cancelled if Theresa May's deal fails. The latest less than subtle warning to Conservatives from someone close to the Prime Minister. The Foreign Secretary said Parliament could leave the UK in paralysis as it tries very hard to rule out a no deal. Sky's Deputy Political Editor Beth Rigby reports.
In normal times, Westminster clears out on a Friday, but these are extraordinary times, and that means the Commons is sitting with the Home Secretary at the dispatch box.
The deal on the table is the best option available.
The Foreign Secretary out on behalf of the PM, and the Work and Pensions Secretary in action today too, as Theresa May tries, probably in vain, to grind out a victory in Tuesday's vote on her Brexit deal. Mr Hunt warning dozens of Eurosceptic Tory MPs that voting her down might lead to no Brexit at all.
We can no longer assume that by rejecting this deal there will be a better shade of Brexit. And what is more likely, if this deal is rejected, is that we have the risk of Brexit paralysis.
But it's not just Parliament trying to rule out no deal, it's Cabinet Remainers like Amber Rudd too. Can you, in your heart, remain in Cabinet if no deal becomes Plan B?
I am committed to making sure that we get the withdrawal agreement through next week. I have been in and out of Cabinet, and I find you have more influence in Cabinet.
Despite her best schmoozing efforts, the PM's been hosting drinks parties here all week. She's making very little progress when it comes to actually convincing MPs to change their minds. Current estimates suggest she'll lose next week by more than 200 votes. Little wonder then that parliamentarians are already plotting their next moves, filling the power vacuum with their own Plan Bs.
One option being talked up is a Norway-style Brexit deal, which would give the UK access to the single market without being a member of the EU. But it also means freedom of movement would continue.
There is a Plan B, and that's why I've been working with a number of MPs on both sides of the House. And I think joining the European Free Trade Area, EFTA, the Norway model, would deliver so much of what my constituents voted for.
As MPs continue their manoeuvres, Number 10's hoping that European colleagues will throw the Prime Minister's deal a much-needed lifeline, perhaps a glimmer of something today.
We'll see between now and Tuesday what the British Parliament conclusions will be regarding the text proposed. I still hope we will have a deal. I don't like the prospect of a no deal, which would be a catastrophe both for the British and for the European continent. Every effort needs to be made between now and Tuesday afternoon to ensure that this important issue can be resolved satisfactorily.
Talks will continue between London and Brussels over the weekend. Mrs May looking for further assurances as she tries to rally last-minute support for her deal. Probably too little too late, but she's clinging on to Plan A for now. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
The Saudi teenager who barricaded herself inside a Thai hotel room and demanded asylum is on her way to a new life. She's flying to Canada, whose Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, said his country understood how important it was to stand up for women's rights. Rahaf Mohammed Al-Qanoun claims her family abused her and says she fears being killed if she returns home. Our correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, reports now from Bangkok.
I'm not leaving my room until I see UNHCR. I want asylum.
She's an 18-year-old fleeing her family, but in less than a week, Rahaf Mohammed Al-Qanoun's story has spread far beyond her homeland. After having her passport seized in Bangkok, the Saudi teen used social media to plead for help, refuge from alleged abuse at home for renouncing Islam. On Friday night, her call was answered. As she boarded a plane, Thai officials confirmed she was leaving for Canada.
It's her personal decision. She said that the first thing she will do when she gets there is to learn the language. She seems very determined. Yes, Toronto. At the moment, she is good and healthy. She has good mental health and seems happy.
I'm still in the room. I have no choice. They said I have to go tomorrow, and no one can help me right now.
Stopped in Thailand after running away from a family holiday in Kuwait, Rahaf's story went viral. Thousands have watched updates since she first barricaded herself in a Bangkok hotel room fearing deportation. Her tweets have prompted offers of help from several countries and sparked an online campaign to improve Saudi women's rights. And it's Canada, an open critic of Saudi Arabia's treatment of women, that will welcome her.
Canada has been unequivocal that we will always stand up for human rights and women's rights around the world. This is part of a long tradition of Canada engaging constructively and positively in the world and working with our partners, allies, and with the United Nations. And when the United Nations made a request of us that we grant Ms. Al-Qunun asylum, we accepted.
En route to Canada after launching a mobile revolution, Rahaf is now free. But the battle is far from won for the thousands of other women in Saudi Arabia still fighting for their rights. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News in Bangkok.
The government shutdown in the United States is just hours from becoming the longest in the country's history. It's because of a standoff between Donald Trump and his opponents over the president's plans for a border wall. And he said he won't declare an emergency to get funding to build it just yet. And with Congress unable to find a resolution, workers are demanding they be paid. Caught in the middle of a battle the president doesn't seem willing to give up on. Sky's senior correspondent Ian Woods reports.
Latonya Jha is trying to find a way to make ends meet because her employer isn't paying her wages. Her boss is the President of the United States.
How are you doing with the shutdown?
I'm trying to hang in there the best
Donald Trump's ongoing stalemate with Congress over funding his border wall means 800,000 federal workers are in the same boat.
Do we have to have a wall? Could it be something else? I don't understand. Don't we have structures up there now? And then they say, too, that the majority of the people who are slipping in aren't even coming in through the southern border. So why do we have to be out of work when the facts don't match up?
End the shutdown now! End it now! End it now!
As the partial government shutdown becomes the longest in history, workers are increasingly making their voices heard, angry at the financial impact on them and their families.
End the shutdown!
Hundreds demonstrated outside the White House, with most pinning the blame for the deadlock firmly at the door of the president.
Well, I'll just have to call bill collectors and beg for forgiveness and try to keep our credit rating somewhere where it should be, but we'll have to try to figure out how we're going to pay them. We don't know how we're going to do it yet. We don't have an idea.
But many of those laid off also want to talk about the consequences for the public. Among those not working, aviation inspectors.
We're the next level of safety in terms of inspecting all the flights that go in and out of the national airspace system. So we're not out there to verify that the airlines are doing what they're supposed to. The repair stations are fixing things appropriately and in accordance with manufacturer instructions.
Still on duty because their jobs are deemed essential are security staff at airports. But they're working without pay. Their bosses at the TSA admit there's been a slight increase in absenteeism in recent days, but insist it hasn't had an impact on passengers or created an opportunity for a terrorist attack.
But a union leader representing 51,000 airport screeners across the country says that's bound to get worse the longer the dispute goes on. And working without pay means they'll become more demoralised and less attentive at their jobs.
Mr. Trump says he's not yet ready to take a decision which would reopen government, but escalate the dispute to unprecedented levels.
If they can't do it, I will declare a national emergency. I have the absolute right to do it.
But critics say that would undermine the very foundations on which American democracy was built. The President and Congress are supposed to work out a deal together. Ian Woods, Sky News, Washington.
2 journalists jailed for 7 years in Myanmar will have to serve their full sentences after having their appeal dismissed. Walone and Jo So-u were arrested while reporting on the mass murder of 10